Hello, and welcome to Making Known the Unknown. I'm your host, Tina Tarryk, and with me today is Sidney Schwartz, teacher and Bible researcher from New Jersey.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Reverend Hewitt, founder and pastor of Gifts of the Spirit Church. Both gentlemen, of course, are co-authors of the book, My First Encounter with an Angel, Revelations of Ancient Wisdom. Welcome.
Good morning.
This is the second part of the program that we refer to as Gifts of the Spirit. And we will be exploring more of what we are learning are gifts of the Spirit, as found in Corinthians and the Bible. One of the first gifts that I would like to discuss is the gift of trance mediumship. I've read in the book a little bit about this, but really would like to know from you, Sidney, and you, Carl, how does this operate in a person? What comes out as a result of that? Who would like to begin?
Well, a trance medium is one who has the ability to go within themselves, calm their body down, and allow their spirit, their soul, to leave their body. And in that process, another spirit steps into the body and uses the vocal cords to speak. Now that sounds I'm saying it very simplistically. There's a lot more spirit people involved. There's also spirit chemists involved. There's spirits involved keeping the body functioning and everything else. So it's a very complex process. And there's also different layers of trance. And the one I just described is deep trance, where the spirit totally leaves. Deep trance mediums, it's a very tiring process, because what is happening is that the spirit world vibrates much faster than we vibrate. It's kind of like, just like these television waves are going out through the community and being picked up, they have to be brought down and converted down to levels that people can hear and see. The spirit world vibrates even higher than TV waves. So what has to happen is, and for the spirit of our spirit to come in and take over this body, the whole physical body has the vibrational rate, the normal rate of metabolical processes has to be driven up faster. So in other words, the heartbeat goes up, the blood pressure, all these things go at an increased rate, because it has to meet the spirit. The spirit can't come down all the way down to the physical body. There's a meeting in between. And so therefore, it's very tiring for when the trance medium comes out. They're usually extremely exhausted and very tired, and also very dry, because all this higher rate of metabolism makes the body dry, and the trance medium needs water immediately afterwards. So it's a lot more complex, and it can even be dangerous for the medium at times if things aren't done 100% correctly. But what trance medium allows to happen is that it allows people to hear spirit directly, because the spirit people talk through the physical body of the medium, and the audience can physically hear the message, as opposed to it's a more direct connection to spirit than hearing someone repeat something clairaudiently.
Thank you. Are there examples in the Bible? I know that had been one of the focuses, is that some mediumistic examples have been written out of the Bible. Are there any that you can tell us about that you found in your research?
Samuel chapter 28. Why don't you tell them?
Okay. The medium of Endor was one prime example of trance mediumship. And what happened here was that Saul, who was the king of Israel, he woke up one morning and he found out that he looked out and there was a Philistine army. His enemies were gathering around. And he knew there was going to be a battle. And before this time, he had a reform where he had all the mediums that were around either executed or banished from Israel. So he wanted to talk to the Lord to find out what's going to happen to him, which was quite common in biblical days. And so he went about the correct manner of doing that. He's consulted the prophets and dreams and Urim, and Urim was a divination device that the priests were allowed to use. But he wasn't getting any answers, because what had happened was that Saul had not listened to what Spirit or God wanted before, and so therefore they abandoned him, and they weren't going to listen to, help him out anymore. So then he went to seek to his servants, and he asked his servants to find him a medium or a trance speaker. There's lots of different words from the 130 different Bibles. for this particular Hebrew phrase, Bahalas Ov,
Familiar spirit.
familiar spirit. Find me a familiar spirit, and that means a spirit that belonged to the family that had already gone to the spirit world. So he finally found one, and she lived in Endor. And he went to see her. They waited until it was nightfall, and they disguised themselves, and he took 2 servants, and he went to this woman who happened to be living in a cave at the time. And she invited them in when they came, and he said, I want to talk to a dead man, is what one Bible says. He says, divine for me by, through your spirit, and bring up the person that I want to speak with. And right away she says, who are you? She says, you know that Saul has made this illegal. He's trying to, have me killed. And he says, no, I assure you that nothing bad will happen to you. So she begins to go into a trance state, and just as she starts to go, she recognizes that she starts to see a spirit materialize that she could see. And she recognized it as Samuel. And she said, you must be Saul, and you must be the king. And he said, yes, and what do you see? And then she goes into trance, and Samuel comes through and basically tells the king that he's going to die the next day, which basically is what happened. And so this is one example of trance that's in the Bible, one of the more famous ones.
Thank you. So let me understand this. Samuel, who had already died,
Right.
came through the woman
Yes.
and Endor, and did the woman look like Samuel, or did she just sound like Samuel?
The voice would have been Samuel's voice, and the message would have been his message to her. Her physical features probably would not have changed that much.
I have to tell you honestly, it sounds like a pretty scary process. When you talked about the soul speeding up its vibrations and mixing or switching off so that another entity can come through. Maybe Carl, because you have done this,
It's a natural
can
thing.
tell me about it.
Really is. I want to comment on this because, as what he said, the Bible, the men never had any respect for women in those days, and so they wouldn't even say that this woman, whose name was Zephaniah, no Bible says that it was Zephaniah. They don't even give her a name. They called them witches in those days because any priest anywhere, any of their religions, they hated anyone who had the gifts of the Spirit when they didn't have them. This is why they hated Jesus. This is why they got rid of him. They silenced him. And this has been going on all the time. There are people who's going to watch this program and they hate my guts, and I'll say it right on the air, simply because I'm a medium. But I know what I'm talking about. I have researched this. This man has researched this. There's no hocus pocus here. If people want to go back and check out what Jesus really taught, this is all he taught. All he taught. And they've got this thing for people worshiping him. He didn't want to be worshiped. He was simply a teacher. He was a person who loved everybody. He didn't care what they were.
When you read the Bible carefully, many of the prophets have a gift, 2 gifts, 3 gifts.
Yeah.
But Jesus was the only prophet that had all the gifts of
All
the
the
Spirit.
gifts.
He showed and demonstrated each and every one of them.
Now, Carl, as a trance medium yourself, having done this, and maybe Sidney Schwartz, you could tell us a little bit about what you have observed. What happens to you? What do you go through?
I'm going to let Sidney tell you, because this book here was done while I was in trance. This entity that came through me, I didn't know who he was, because when I go into trance, it's like going to sleep. Somebody taking over my body. And I have to listen to the tapes, because everything goes on a tape. Sidney puts the tape on the headset, and he listens and he types it in the computer. This is how this book came. I have to either read the book or listen to the tapes to know what was said. I'm so tired afterwards that, well, I get a little bit worn out and grouchy, and I say, I don't want nothing to do with this work anymore. I go to bed. And let him tell you. He'll tell you the experience he had the first time.
It depends who's taking over Carl's body. In other words, there's one spirit who comes through. His name's Nathaniel. When Nathaniel comes through, he's relatively easy to come through to Carl because they've known each other for so long and worked together for so long. But when Nathaniel comes through, he comes through with his signature message, "A jolly good evening to you," in a very British accent. And after that, it would take more energy to keep that accent going. So then Carl's speech goes back into more of his normal speech, but not necessarily. Carl coming from the South, has a tendency to say the word doin', going. We're not putting an ing on the end of a word. When he's in trance, very often he is saying going, and sometimes it's going, depending on who's speaking. So that we're told that his spirit is limited to his vocabulary, but his pronunciation differs from his own waking state, depending who's in the body. When A1 comes through, he has his own signature greeting to greet me. And the first time he came through, it was very intense because I was kind of not so sure what was going on, because all of a sudden, I had heard Carl go into trance many times. Nathaniel came through, other spirit people came through. Carl's Indian guide, Lone Eagle, has come through many times to speak, and sometimes he comes through a little bit roughly, with his mannerisms. But Awan was, he all of a sudden he was telling me he's an angel, and I guess I got a little bit skeptical because I never spoke to an angel, someone who said he was an angel before. And all of a sudden, he did something to the room. I mean, it was like awe-inspiring. It was like this intense power was just so evident that I couldn't help but notice. And when I asked him about it, he said, "Well, you wanted proof I was an angel, didn't you?" And I'm showing you some of my power.
Could I interject just for a moment, just so that everyone who is watching knows? You mentioned Nathaniel.
Yes.
But then you are now talking about Awan. Awan happens to be
the angel without a name. He's the one who has directed most of this book. He's the one that I speak to in order with the writing of the book, and he's the one that tells me about the history of certain things, and we're having these conversations, and he was the one that told me that the Bible had been changed.
So this is
explain that to the people, why he wants to be called Awan rather than...
Right. Well, the only name he would give was A1, representing angel without a name, because he's claimed that the world had 12,000 religions already and they don't need any more. And he wasn't going to be the start of another one. Because he said for every time that an angel speaks to people, a religion gets formed. And so he refused to give us any more detail about his name or his life, really.
So Nathaniel gives you a name. A1 doesn't want a name.
Right.
And we're talking about the room was filling up with energy. Something had changed in the room?
Yes.
Would you like to continue from there?
It's very hard to describe that, so there's really no words for it. It was just a very intense experience.
So you're there, you have Carl next to you.
Yes.
Speaking to you.
When Carl goes into trance, sometimes his body will shudder a few times. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes there's a slight snore. Sometimes, it varies. And the same way when he comes out, sometimes it's harder than other times. Most of the time, though, he'll start coughing, and that's because his voice is so dry. And sometimes he's so weak he can't even pick up the glass of water. I have to pick it up and help him drink it. But he definitely needs lots of water right after the trance.
I remember the first time that A1 came through. I remember it very well because when I came out of that trance, he was very pale. He was almost as pale as the pages of that book. And tears were coming down his face. And I said, "What happened?" He says, "I have never experienced power so strong in my life as what happened." And I was too tired. I couldn't even wait. I couldn't even stop and listen. I had to go to bed. And I hate to spend that time in bed but my body is exhausted.
See, A1 is a very highly evolved entity. And the first, I would say, 5 or 6 times that A1 came through, he would never directly come into Carl's body. Nathaniel would come in first, as he called it, to warm up the body. In other words, to start raising the frequency higher and higher. But it still had to go higher than Nathaniel in order for A1 to come in. So sometimes Nathaniel came in briefly to warm things up, as it were.
Very interesting. So now the entire book has been, as a result of these trance sessions with A1.
Right.
And
as far as the trance sessions go, lots of times A1 would give me assignments to do some research, and some of that book is chapters of the research I did.
Really?
But as a result of what he asked me to find.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, I'm also interested in another type of gift that I've understood that might cross over into this trance gift, and that's the one of prophecy. Is anything prophesized while someone's in a trance, or is this a different gift altogether, or can there be an
remember one thing: when a person prophesies, they're able to really go into the future. It's known as remote viewing. And that is something our government here has been involved in. I know all about that. But they've hidden it from the people. And there's a book out there somewhere on the market that deals with that.
Psychic Warrior.
The Psychic Warrior. Because I knew the guy very well. It was involved. And he wanted the public to know that, but boy, they tried to gag him so he wouldn't talk about it. But a medium that has that ability can take a picture of someone missing, somebody that was kidnapped perhaps, and can focus in on that picture. Then they close their eyes, or they put blinders on so that there's no light playing on those eyes. And that person could leave their body, even though they're sitting right there, across the desk from this controller. They leave the body, and they wind up, after a few minutes, the controller would say, "Where are you now?" Say, "Well, I'm not sure where I am," but he says, "I'm in a city that it has cobblestone streets." And they keep going like that, and that person, the instrument doing remote viewing, finds where that person is. That's how the Boston Strangler was found back in the 60s, because I know the man very well that brought the medium from Holland over here, and it was a matter of minutes that they arrested this man in Boston. They couldn't find him before. They couldn't catch up with him. He did remote viewing by watching different pictures and everything else. And it was going on thousands of years ago. It's still going on today. But it's something that is not that open to the public, because there's a lot of scoffers out there. There's a lot of skeptics. And then you get these people that believe that there's a devil, there's demons and all of that. I mean, they're so close-minded, they can't even see beyond the end of their nose.
Now, I'm sure most of us have heard about Nostradamus. And some of the prophecies. Was he a real person? Did he have this gift?
Yes, he did. Nostradamus was one who would put himself into a semi-trance state and see visions. See, the gift of prophecy is kind of an umbrella gift, because it like piggybacks on many of the others. Some mediums will you have to understand that the spirit world is a timeless dimension. They have no time over there. So if you're in communication with the spirit, if you're hearing them clairaudiently, the spirit could easily tell you what's going to happen in the future, because they don't have a time clock. They're not on the time spiral. The spirit can give you a vision, clairvoyance, and of something in the future, like Ezekiel did when he saw the valley of dry bones, and he was prophesying the Holocaust that happened 27 centuries later. So it works that way. You can prophesy through the gift of dreams. You can have a dream that's prophetic. So it crosses over a lot of the different gifts. It's an aspect of some of the gifts, because you're getting a message about a different time frame, and that's what prophecy is.
Excuse me, which is the one where they projected the vision of the ripe fruit? Hosea?
No, that was Amos.
Amos. Okay, in the Bible, read the book of Amos.
Chapter 2, verse 8.
Chapter 2, verse 8.
Or 8:2.
This was when, for the first time, he heard a voice. They were testing him out to see if he was seeing the vision that they were projecting to him. And so they were projecting to him a vision of a basket of ripe fruit. But you see, he had been wondering when the pot was going to boil over with that country just north of them, when things were going to happen. And he was searching his mind, wondering what is going to happen there. So the spirit people projected him the vision, and then they spoke to him clairaudiently, and they said, "What do you see?" And he says, "I see a basket of ripe fruit." They said, "What do you think that means?" He said, "I don't know." And they said to him, "That means the season when this would happen that you're concerned about," you see?
See, these are almost like training sessions. The same thing
Yeah.
happened to Jeremiah in chapter 1 and Zechariah in chapter 5, where Spirit projected an image to them, and so they say, "What do you see?" And the prophet would say, "Well, I see this, the others." Jeremiah saw an almond branch, and Zephaniah saw something. Zechariah saw something else. But then they would interpret it for them. So in other words, they were teaching them about symbology, because with the gift of clairvoyance, very often it works. It's very visual, because that way they don't have to deal with language, and a system of symbology evolves between the medium and the spirits that are working with them, so that it's like their own private language. If you ever watch John Edwards, he often refers to, well, this image means this to me, therefore this means this is what's going on. So he often decodes that symbology that he has with his spirit people.
Now, Carl, you had mentioned that the government has used this or is using this, but we don't really know about this.
Oh, sure. Russia, back in the 60s, they took over one of their universities out there, and they put these big fences around it, just like you'd have around a prison. And everybody in Russia that was gifted, they brought them there, promised them the world. This is why there was 2 teachers in this country that went there on vacation and got acquainted with a couple of teachers in that country. Those teachers sort of smuggled them into the university, and they found out that that's all they teach in there. So the book that they were involved with was Psychic Phenomena Behind the Iron Curtain, because Russia got into it when we launched our first atomic submarine, and it was able to go under the ocean and stay for 6 months. They were wondering there, how could we communicate with those men in that submarine for 6 months? And so somebody over there said they're doing it through telepathy, which is one of the gifts of the spirit. And so that's when Russia got busy and got everybody in the country that they could find that was gifted to work with them. And so this government is working with that too, regardless of what anybody tells.
Now, I can understand the idea that this needs to remain secret, almost like a secret weapon, so that other governments or countries wouldn't be able to figure that out. But,
You got that
but
right.
The most disturbing question that I have is with respect to law enforcement. You mentioned people, police departments using people who can do remote viewing to help find people. Why wouldn't we enlist people with this gift to help all police departments everywhere to find people and to help where there are missing children and fugitives have run off? What is your take on that?
In the past, anyone hearing what the church has to say, you know, they believe it 100%, 1,000%. And then when you hear about this gifted person, right away they said, he's a fraud or she's a fraud, there is no such thing. That person doesn't even understand the Bible. And the church is not going to talk about this because they don't want people to know the truth about it. They don't want the people to know that there is no devil and there's no demons and all of that business. The demons are on the streets in this country. That's where they are. You want to find a devil? Go out there and drive your car. You'll find one.
So, thank you. So good enough for the government, but not good enough for the rest of us.
That's right.
That's a little disturbing. I find that disturbing.
Listen, spirit people told me that the first religion that was ever created was created by the government. And there came a time when the church had more money than the government had, and then the church wanted a divorce from the government. So that separated the church from the state. So that's where we are today. They don't want us to know the truth about this. I have met, and every time I hear of a person that has a gift of the Spirit, I slip in the back door and hide up in the back as far away from them as possible, scooch down so they can hardly see me. I did that over here at, I think it's Two Rivers or Three River College in Norwich. Mm-hmm. I did that because I'd heard about these two people. Well, the man's wife was a very good clairvoyant. She was a very good medium, but he wasn't. He didn't have the gift of the Spirit. I mean, he looked like Walking Dead because his light was so dim. I'm sorry, it's true.
Now, I had another question about remote viewing or prophesizing. Can somebody know exactly when something's going to happen? Because I'm guessing here that some of the traumatic things that some of us have experienced recently, especially since September 11th, you would guess that people who have this gift could have foreseen this, warned people, prevented this somehow. There's a frustration level there that I imagine some people would have around all of this. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Well, you have to remember again that the spirit world's a timeless dimension. So sometimes they're not very good at pinpointing exact times, exact dates. In the Bible, there's a case where Elisha is prophesying for this one woman that she's going to have a child, and she doesn't think she can. And in some Bibles, it's stated very clearly. I think it was the Geneva Bible that said that by the time the fruit is ripe, you will have a child. So it didn't give a date, but it gave it like a season. And sometimes that's one way that spirit works, is to kind of give you a time frame, but it's not an exact date.
Okay, thank you.
My bookkeeper was the biggest skeptic I've ever known on this planet, recently passed on. And I was at his house one time a few years ago, I think it was back in the 80s, and his brother was there on his way back to Kentucky where he lived. And when I saw that light around him and he and his wife left, I said to my bookkeeper, I said, "Did your brother say anything to you about having liver cancer?" He said, "Of course not." And then he turned at me, he says, "Oh, you've been talking to the little spirits again?" And I said, "Your brother does have liver cancer." And so about a month or so after that, I had to stop by and bring some more papers to him. And at that time I walked in, the phone rang, and it was his brother in Kentucky, and his brother was telling him that he only has a very short time to live. And Spirit told me right there to tell him, because he's such a skeptic, that his brother will die next August the 14th at 11:20 in the morning, and he died exactly on that moment. He was there with his brother along with the other members of the family in Kentucky. But they all said it was just guessing. Can you imagine guessing?
Well, you certainly showed him in that instance.
Yes.
Just getting back a little bit to prophecy with respect to September 11th. Had you yourself, Carl, seen anything? Were there any triggers, any signs, anything that you came upon?
I met with the FBI and a lot of other officials of law, the law officials here in this state, and in a secret meeting, and told them things. I cannot reveal it on this film, of course. But they have a record of me in the FBI headquarters, because it was about a month before President Reagan was shot. I saw this, and I went out into the other building and told some of my staff, and they insisted that I call the FBI, and I did. They recorded it. They came to see me after, and it happened almost exactly as I had seen it. I described a whole bunch of camera people on this side of the street, and the man was coming out of the building over there, and I said, "It seems as if somebody with a movie camera has taken the guts out of the movie camera and put a gun in it," because I said, one of these men is shooting the president. It happened exactly the same way. So they have me on record down there, so I've helped them.
That's a phenomenal story. That's amazing. I think that's a topic for a whole other show, perhaps, that we touched upon. Well, this is going to end our show for today. Part 2 on Gifts of the Spirit, where we've covered examples of trance mediumship and prophecy, along with remote viewing, and of course discussing some of telepathy as well. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Carl and Sidney, and thank you for joining us.